stood on this side know that we believe very much in supporting the productive sectors. This is not a fight against sugar. This is a fight to ensure that if we believe that sugar is so important, that we must help those who need the help most. And for us, that is the cane farmers. We believe, Madam President, in sustaining the northern communities of our country that depend on sugar. But we also believe, Madam President, in accountability, and there is none in this bill. We believe in being fair to the farmers. We believe in transparency in public financing, something which this administration has long departed from. I watched as my colleague in the House of Representatives tried painstakingly to get some answers from the Minister of Housing about how much the houses cost. And that was an insult. But it is the practice of this administration not to be accountable at all. They want you, they come like then they do fanciness, then they do this, then they do that. Don't worry, the poor people are getting benefits, but underneath the poor people are being shafted, Madam President. And this arrangement right here is a shafting of the people. It is a shafting of the cane farmers. So don't come and dress it up. And I am awaiting their responses. They cannot do that, Madam President, in good conscience. They cannot do that. I don't know. And none of them seated here today are from the north. So maybe that's, or you're from the North Coast, Orange Walk? But all I know, you are from Belize City, but all right. And Senator Arana. All right, so what they just said to me is that we should look forward, Madam President, for them to stand up on behalf of the northern communities of the cane farmers who, I repeat, are not getting the best end of this deal. We believe on this side, Madam President, in measurable returns for national concessions. And if the government wishes to extend these exemptions for another decade, then we should have conditions. Conditions, we repeat, Madam President, that are tied to farmer protection. Conditions, Madam President, that are tied to employment stability. Conditions, Madam President, that are tying the hands of these companies to ensure that they reinvest some of these profits in our sugar industry. Conditions, Madam President, that ties them to give us some kind of break on electricity affordability. Conditions, Madam President, that are tied to transparent reporting in this National Assembly, but overall in our nation. Belize, Madam President, deserves nothing less. Thank you.
Senator, I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I really didn't think that we would have had this type of debate on this bill. I thought this was a very straightforward one, and so I really wasn't planning on saying much on the bill, but since my colleague gave such a passionate presentation in it, I feel compelled to stand up for my side of the equation, and that is the businesses and the private sector. Madam President, I want to...
Senators, kindly be reminded Standing Order 40B to remain silent while another senator is speaking.
Madam President, before I get into that, I want to maybe add some context to this discussion. From the 1990s, Madam President, there was an act called the Export Processing Zone Act. And that came out of an initiative of NETEF. And NETEF was the National Economic task force, I believe. And that was set up by a host of very influential, knowledgeable people within the system, private sector, government. And I wasn't around at the time, but I believe it was a cross-section of persons who came up with ideas on how they could have spurred the economy into towards development. As you may recall, in the 1980s and 90s, Madam President, Belize was very young. It was just trying to get its act together. And employment was a huge, huge issue, a huge concern at the time. I mean, at that time, unemployment was very high. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it may have been actually Prime Minister Esquivel who had put together this task force. And one of those initiatives of the task force was the export processing zone. And what the export processing zone did was it offered certain incentives for companies who set up in Belize, or even Belizeans who may have an export-oriented business, and it gives them certain concessions. Many of those concessions would have been tax breaks. And so that's where you have the commercial free zones, and many initiatives that are still with us today came out of that. The export processing zone was repealed sometime within the last 5 years, though, I believe. And it was replaced by the DPA, which was the designated processing zone. Now, those are policies, Madam President, where any company, these are policies where any company who are involved in exports can apply and fit under that policy framework. So, for example, I'll give you an example. The BPOs are under the DPA because the BPOs are here, they don't utilize us, their services are not utilized in Belize. We provide the labor, we provide the expertise, and then but the services are exported or shipped abroad. And that has been a major driver for development of this industry over the past year. I mean, what are we employing right now? About 24,000 people throughout the country. Tremendous impact on unemployment. I think this economy would not have been anywhere near it is without that type of contribution from the sector, Madam President. And similar with other sectors, Madam President, where the need for some type of reprieve from the cost of doing business internally. And so that is why that policy was set up, so that we can better compete abroad when we export these services or when we export these products. Now, BSI would not come under those because BSI has its own act. It has the Belize Sugar Industries Act. And so when the need for any type of reprieve from taxes, it has to come to the National Assembly as a bill. So that is basically what we're seeing right now. But in any other case, if they didn't have their own bill, they would have just applied to the DPA, and we wouldn't have been having this debate here in this chamber this morning. And so I'm saying, Madam President, is that there is a policy in place that takes care of this. And so I don't really feel that it's fair to say, in my view, that we're giving tax breaks to multinationals, because that is what the policy was set up to do. Not only multinationals, but every company that is involved in exports qualify to come under this policy. And the only reason, like I said, why we have to, because BSI has its own act. And so I'm hoping, Madam President, that my colleagues will reconsider their positions on this bill, because I think that it's important that we look at our industries in Belize. We need a lot of help. We need a lot of assistance. The BPOs right now are under significant threat from AIs and new technologies out there. And so even though you may say that you've been in business 5, 10, 15 years, challenges are always coming up. For example, over the past 10 years, we've seen labor increase by about 50% in the labor market. That's not something we could have foreseen. And so the environment is always changing. And so it's not, in my view, accurate to say that you've been in business for so long so you don't need any other type of support. I mean, there will always be instances where adjustments have to be made. In this case, there are no adjustments. They're just bringing, the company is trying to command our policy that already exists. And so I want to close with that, Madam President. I hate to, not being able to support my colleague in this, but I think I felt it necessary to try to put it in context, Madam President, that this is not a one. I don't feel like this is one of those, and unfair trade, of course, I think that there could be a discussion on that, but this bill is not about that. But this bill is not about that. And so I'm saying that I think we just have to deal with this bill in front of us based on the merits of the bill and what is in front of us this morning. So with that, Madam President, I thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. Thanks.
I recognize Senator Sheena Pitts.
Good morning, Madam President. Welcome back, Senator Dr. El McKay, and Madam President, Senator Galvez, Senator Arana. You know, I cannot go without wishing you personally, Happy Women's Month. And I'm particularly congratulatory to the efforts of Senator Galvez and the dear Madam Clark in executing the Why Will initiative and hosting that debate by the Young Women in Leadership activity. And you know why I love that so much? It exposed something in our community, in our men. The fragility of their egos, their unregulated emotions, and you will hear me talk about that some more. Because could you imagine, Madam President? Well, make we no point, man, because a mirror there between you. It goes both ways. The point, Madam President, while Senator Galvez and Madam Clark executed such a wonderful initiative, none other than our men, and I will tell you, it came from some people in our own party, chose that time to say, when women educate and enjoy the space they're in, it bears a direct correlation to the problems in our society. Not the fact that the men in our society, they have poor, unregulated emotions for go be criminals. But anyway, I digress. Senator Galvez, great job. Madam Clark, great job. Madam President, you were here and you saw the women and you gave them encouragement. And I say to them, track your involvement for the future. Don't just do this for now and get lost. In relation to the bill, Madam President, I am glad that Senator Herrera went before me. And let me say that I fully associate myself with Senator Dennison and Senator Farber. And so in the true passage of debate, I will not substantially repeat what they have said, more than to place on record my association with their presentations. But what I want to do for you, especially Senator Herrera, because you see, this country and the work of government is never for the few, it is for the many. And when we deal with laws, we have to keep a track of where we are moving to. So what I would like to do for you, Senator Herrera, and the Belizean public, not singling you out, even though I call your name and I will continue to do so. This bill has a core change and shift from what the original legislation was. And I will go through it to show you, Madam President, and the Belizean people, why it is there is fundamentally an issue with this, and not for ensuring these large corporations maintain their space in the environment. The bill repeals and replaces key sections, the section 3, 4, and 6 of the Principal Act, and reintroduces tax exemptions, as was said, for 10-year periods starting 1st October 2025. And this is not a minor update. This is a reset of concession regime. Call it what it is, plain and simple. And the practical effect is that it extends preferential treatment that would otherwise expire and locks it in again for another decade. Now, how does it depart from the original law, Madam President? Because now go back to in the 80s, you know, Senator Herrera, make we look on the two legislation that is being affected. Time-bound concessions, renewed long-term entitlement under the original act. This is what is important to listen to, Senator Herrera. Tax and duty exemptions were time-limited, tied to initial development of the cogeneration project. Under the amendment, those exemptions are restarted and extended for another 10 years. Now, you tell me. Well, yeah, they say it hard, man. I don't mind if you join me with my debate. And let me tell you why this matters. Originally, Senator Herrera, the concessions were justified as incentives for investment and project development. Originally, you know. Now, in this new bill, they function as ongoing operational subsidies for a mature enterprise. And I remind you what Senator Denison said and what Senator Farber said. This is a mature enterprise, not in its infancy. And if we are to appreciate that they are in some form of infancy and needing of this concession, then tell us. But this leader for government business stand up and not say none of that. Get all of we hard work. Maybe when he answer back, he said anything there. But man, Peter Lee has done gone, you know. So the key departure is that the bill shifts from incentivizing investment to sustaining profit advantage. It is simply that. Now there is the expansion of tax coverage that gives broader benefits. The new Section 3 exempts BSI Belcogen from business tax, withholding tax on interest, dividends, and technical services. The new Section 4 exemption from customs and excise duties. And the new Section 6 gives exemptions from stamp duties. And what does this mean? Compared to a typical corporate structure, BSI Belcogen now profits from avoidance on taxes on profits, avoidance on taxes on financing flows, avoidance on taxes on imported inputs, and avoidance of taxes on for transactional matters. Everything todo. Only then the ganamos, not the cane farmers. This departure consolidates a multi-layered tax immunity across the entire business cycle of that company. Now the retrospective commencement. This is a strategic advantage for them, you know, because Clause 5 is deemed effective, as Senator Denison pointed out, for October 2025. Yeah. The implication is that it covers the period between when prior exemptions expired and when the law is passed. And this departure ensures there is no gap in tax liability, even if one existed. So when Senator Denison say, make sure they go collect back there, this is the space in which he referred. Because no other Belizean is allowed to enjoy these kinds of benefits. We saw the undertaker fellow, what is his name? Mornings, man. Mornings get dragged through the mud when the Prime Minister's sister had how much? And allowed for pay what, $2,000 a month? No, man. Anyway, No new conditions attached, and this is a critical change from the Act. Under a balanced legislative update, you would expect performance conditions, farmer benefit provisions, transparency obligations. You know, basically thing, Senator K, like, all right, we are give you the lead thing and this is what we expect from you. You know? Well, good. Give me figure for the people. No, that is not there. This amendment introduces no new obligations, no new performance benchmark, and creates no accountability mechanism. Effectively, BSI Belcogen go and operate in their own space, make their own money, keep their own money, and we can't say nothing, can't ask no one, no nothing. Yeah, they are carried out because they're not fire there, you know. This departure shows that the state renews benefit without negotiating terms. Now, let that sink in. The state is renewing benefits without renegotiating terms. Me, if I change my name to BSI Belcogen and be the sweetheart for the days when I get Senator Farber, me need to start getting at the business of sugar. But let me not make light of something so serious. And Senator Herrera, this is what is important, the shift in policy philosophy. The original framework implicit in it encouraged investment, encouraged infrastructure development, encouraged energy generation. But this amendment framework actually maintains profitability, maintains cost advantage, maintains financial insulation. So when we look at what was before, make we compare what is being amendment and what is being lost, because that is what is important. And when we have no information that justifies this departure, it makes open wide your invitation to me to change my view. Well, hard no, hard no, hard on this board. Who benefits from the change? Senator Herrera? Because BSI and Belcogen gain reduced tax burden for another decade, improve cash flow, increase retained earnings, and lower cost of capital and imports. And the government loses tax revenue. The government also loses negotiating leverage. And I'm wondering, we're here to debate the budget. And without preempting any discussion on it, we are here debating a bill that allows the government to lose revenue. That no make no sense. No sense. No sense. Say policy louder, so I could say no sense louder. No new benefit is introduced for farmers. And let me tell you, Madam President, what has not changed and what should have been changed. Because the amendment does not touch cane pricing structure. It does not touch farmer revenue share. It does not touch industry governance. And it does not touch transparency requirements, dispute resolution mechanisms. And I will not go into matters that are sub judice, but imagine the political optics right now of what is going on in that industry and the farmers and we they in here they discuss one bill like this, whereas Senator Faber said it shaft them people. Like, come on. No, man. Like, something has got to be wrong. Is it that, because I heard the Prime Minister said since the Forcerium broke out and the loss in sugar cane business is so grave, he got out. I think he got into coconut now. Yeah, he got into coconut. So he get out and he straight. What about the people who are still in there? The critical point I'm making, Madam President, is that the bill changes financial treatment of the miller, but leaves structural inequities untouched. And those structural inequities are the basis for the cry of the farmers right now. But here we are in these chambers passing a bill that will maintain the status quo against farmers. I don't know, once, and it has always been joked that there are certain persons when I have no heart, my heart cold. You know? And I look up in this room and I wonder, is serious? Is serious? It can't be that compassion escapes us. Money cannot ought not to replace compassion. Now, the net effect of the amendment, Madam President. Before, there were time-limited incentives tied to project development. Now, the renewal is broad on conditional concessions for an additional decade. The amendment transformed temporary incentives into long-term entitlements. The plantation no gone nowhere, you know. They hide it in a plain sight. You know what I mean when I say plantation no gone nowhere? Yeah, say it for me, man. Put on your mic. I incorporate them in my speech. This bill, Madam President, does not modernize the sugar industry. It prolongs preferential treatment for the miller without renegotiating fairness for the farmer. And at a time when we're discussing the national debate that is meant to benefit the people, that is touted to be one of prosperity, well, I see here who they prosper and who not they prosper. The bottom line, Madam President, the amendment departs from the original legislation in three fundamental ways. It extends expired or expiring benefits for another 10 years. It broadens and consolidates tax immunity across operations, and it removes any expectation that concessions must be matched by new obligations. And those reasons, Madam President, in that context, I have to repeat to you, Senator Herrera, your invitation is respectfully denied. It is a hard no, negative no, 9, NUIT. I cannot support this bill.
I recognize Senator Gabriel Zatina.
Thank you, Madam President. First off, before I get into this, I will say it again when I go into my budget debate, but I want to acknowledge some of the members from Belize Rural South who are here, to observe how our debates are carried out, and in turn to support me as well. So thank you guys for being here. And for the Belizean people watching at home, I do wish that you encourage more and more people to tune in, because What we have before us, a one-page back and front bill, basically asking us to pass in this Senate blindly. But before I get into the contributions in this debate, Madam President, I also want to acknowledge women in this country. Women are the backbone of this country. They're the backbone of our household. And they must be acknowledged all the time. Now, when I was going through this, I was curious to know who owns BSI. The Belize sugar industry. And a quick Google search yielded that BSI is owned by an American sugar company. So, with that in mind, I started going over the bill. Again, one page back and front. And the takeaway of this bill is to repeal and replace the following: that BSI and Belcogen shall be exempted from business tax, withholding tax on interest, dividends and payment for technical services. Exemption under subsection 1 shall be for a period of 10 years with effect from the 1st of October 2025. Exempted from customs, exercise duty, again, 10 years. No, I'm reading this for the Belizean people because I don't think they have the privilege to have this information until after it has been passed. BSI and Belcogen shall be exempted from stamp duties for a period, again, 10 years. So, what is this telling the Belizean people? What does even exemption means in this one page? That this company will be paying $0 in taxes. Man, not only will this be setting a precedent for other companies who might be saying, well, I'm struggling. We don't know if that's the case here because we don't know anything. Time after time, this government brings stuff for us to pass blindly in this honorable Senate. Huge disrespect. And they want us to vote on something without knowing what these companies make. What would be going in taxes? Taxes are very important to run the day-to-day operations. Ironically, fuel prices went up because they had to. They needed the taxes on those fuel that are being sold to the Belizean people. At a time like this, at a time, I say, when we find ourselves in a world crisis, this is what's being brought to the Belizean people. Where is the relief for them? I know some of my colleagues have mentioned this before, but we're singing the tune. I know one thing. Well, before I say that, this does not go to say that us on the opposition side, we do not encourage private business, private company. We do. But we're not saying, what I'm not saying is that they should be given a free pass. If they're making their money in this country, it is only fair that they give back to this country. That is how we pay our policemen, firemen, teachers. That is how we continue infrastructure and development in this country. If we pass this, I can only imagine how much more loan motions be coming in here. Because we're losing on revenue.
One line up, Joe.
I want to know, maybe since, you know, the government operates on WhatsApp, right? You guys always get information via WhatsApp. I don't know anything about. If you do a Google search, let me tell you, that is AI, you know. Okay. Sometimes people talk, but anyhow.
I man, take it easy on the old fella.
I want to know, what are we getting in return? Because in this one page back and front, says nothing for farmers. And without the farmers, BSI cannot function as a company. No commitment for reinvestment. And since they're being exempted on stamp duties, I can only imagine how much real estate opportunities they would have. Saving probably millions simply investing in real estate. 8% to foreigners, 5% of the purchase price to Belizeans. But BSI and Belcogen, they pay zero. The way I see it, this is all profits for one, and the Belizean people just have to probably accept it. But, Madam President, I ask now on record that we may put this for a division. But when we get there, Madam President, I want the Belizean people to see the faces of the senators in this chamber who are for them and who are against them. In a time right now, Belizean people are paying higher taxes in almost everything. Companies, this government is saying that private companies pay zero. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Pastor Louis Wade.
Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, fellow senators. All the women in the House, in the Senate, good morning, and this is your very special month. I celebrate. I have 4 sisters, no brother. But I'm also an advocate for men, you know. I have 4 sons, no daughters. So yeah. So, not yet, soon. But I was not planning to speak on this bill, probably maybe just nervous and anxious to get to the budget, I got to admit. But as I listen to the debate as it proceeds through this Honorable Senate, I believe that I need to make my own contribution. I have been in the media for more than 20 years. I have interviewed people from the factory and that side of the industry. I have interviewed farmers. I've interviewed people from the association. And so as time progresses, I form my own opinion on that industry. I don't know why international investors would even want to continue to remain in an industry that for decades is in controversy. Because where there is controversy, you cannot make the kind of returns that you want to make on your investment. You go into business for a return. And the farmers are into their business for a return as well. When the company was up for sale, I wanted the farmers to get the factory. Let them get an opportunity to run it. They could not put together the financing. ASR came in as foreign investors in a very controversial industry here in Belize. And I want to say that it is not totally controversial. There's another factory in Belize that doesn't make the news. There's another factory that is producing sugar that don't make the news. There are other farmers that are farming sugar right now that are not in the news. And they're making money. And I don't want to go into it because I don't even want them to get into the news, because why bring controversy into at least one portion of the industry that is, and as I said, I know what I'm talking about because I've interviewed them. I've been on their properties to see what they're doing. There's Santander. It has a totally different structure, and the part of that industry operating in Cayo District. Cayo District has sugar too. It's different from Orange Walk because the structure is different. And the farmers in Orange Walk, I want them to win. I want them to win. Everybody must win. Everybody should win. And so I was glad that the farmers rejected the $1 million of fertilizer. I'm glad that they're staying in the case. Yes. Who is paying for the lawyers for the farmer in the court case? It's the government that's assisting. So the government is on both sides of this issue, as it should be. Because I want the farmers to win the court case. And the government is in there. The government is also negotiating with the farmers so that the industry can have some kind of tranquility, so that money can be made on all sides. This is a reality of what is taking place. And I'm glad that the farmers, as I said no, as it relates to the $1 million, and that they will still go in court, because I think certain things need to be resolved in the courts. Now, I also heard that farmers in Dangriga, in the citrus industry, they got their $1 million worth of fertilizer. So I hope and expect that regardless of what happens, the farmers in Orange Walk, Corozal, are going to get their $1 million worth of fertilizer too. regardless of whether or not they stay in the fight in the courts. I want them to stay, I want them to win. But here's where I have a problem with where the debate is circling. We want to penalize a company with tax. That is not the purpose of tax.
I thought tax was our duty.
Tax, as it relates to this particular case, should be based upon whether this particular company is going to benefit to the extent that the farmers can benefit and the nation can benefit. So it's whether or not should we give these incentives to the company, whether or not only they will benefit, but the farmers can benefit, and also the nation. And that is why I believe that they should get the exemption. Because they should not be penalized because they are having a particular argument at this time with the farmers. I do not believe that withholding the tax exemption from them as a punishment is a good idea. So I have not been bought into that argument. I want the farmers to win. I want the government to remain committed to the farmers as they pursue the case, but I also want the company to benefit. And I think that is what this bill is able to do. As I've said, I'm going to wind down. I don't believe that we give or withhold tax as punishment. It is everybody's obligation. But the company is able, through this tax exemption, to continue as investors, to remain in the industry, and the farmers will also benefit from this company remaining in the industry. And so I support this bill. I don't think that this is the way to punish a company. And so I will support this bill.
I recognize Senator Roselle Arana.
Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. I was not going to say anything, but after listening to the different comments, I decided to give my input. And looking at this sugar industry cogeneration project bill, I thought about when we lived in Orange Walk and my father worked at BSI. And everybody in our neighborhoods, their parents, the men, worked at BSI. In fact, that's the reason why we have the area called Union Town. And so everybody's parents, well, fathers worked at BSI. And so every June, May, June, the workers at BSI would collect also their dividends. And these dividends would be used for preparation of schooling. What my mother did, she made sure she bought our books, uniform materials in preparation for school in September. And I'm pretty sure many of the other parents did the same. And so, looking at this bill and reflecting at what happened back then, and still continues to happen now. And thinking about how mature, as a senator mentioned earlier, how mature BSI is. In today's times, there is there are a lot of uncertainties. As a matter of fact, this company here had so many losses that millions was lost over a period of time, whether it is for infrastructure or technology factors. And so they want to get back. They want to get back on track. And I believe that if they don't, there can be a collapse. And who is going to be affected? Isn't it the same farmers and workers of the factory? Looking at the amount of people, over 5,000 farmers can be affected. Where will they take their sugar cane? And looking at the workers, there are hundreds of workers at BSI. They will lose their jobs. And so I cannot stand here and not say anything. I need to say something. And I need to say that I have to support this bill. Because I'm thinking about my relatives, my friends, looking at all the people in the northern districts. This could be a catastrophe. And so, Madam President, I support this bill for everybody and for this nation. Thank you.
Madam President, senators opposite said that no senator in this chamber should support this bill. The bill has been described as a sweetheart deal. We need to find out who was the original sugar daddy. Who will make the sweetheart deal in the beginning? I don't want to hear you. The Honorable Senator opposite was the architect. He was on this side in 2012 when the original bill was brought, right? You were the Deputy Prime Minister. You stood up and lauded the deal, the sweetheart deal, the original sugar daddy. You see? It was necessary. I listened carefully to Senator Pitts, Madam President, and she spoke as if she knew. She spoke as if she had authority and knowledge and information. She told this Honorable Senate that when the bill was originally passed in 2012, there were performance indicators and the incentives were tied to certain specific investments. Nothing no go so. The bill is right here. Senator Latina, what's up? The bill, yes. The bill is right here on my phone. It does not include a single performance indicator. It does not include a single investment requirement for the incentives that were originally granted in 2012. The bill, Senator Farber, my friend, in 2012 was passed in the national interest because of the crisis
that occurred at that time. Patience and sweet oil, man. Patience and sweet oil. Take your time. Take your time.
Senators, kindly maintain silence while another senator is speaking.
Let us understand what we're talking about. Belize Sugar Industry Limited employs 650 Belizean workers. So when people grandstand and attack companies, they must understand that they are talking about Belizean workers. Senator Arana spoke from personal knowledge, not from AI, personal knowledge. There are over 5,000 cane farmers. The majority of them are small cane farmers who support their family, who stimulate the economy of this country, who produce significant foreign exchange for this country by farming sugarcane. And let us recall, it was under the United Democratic Party government that the Libertad Sugar Factory shut down. The point I make, Madam President, we can stand here and we can posture, we can profile, and we can grandstand. There is a risk that we are facing in the sugar industry, both in the field and in the factory. You see? You hear? You hear? You don't share? Why you never ask? No, we get up and we profile and we posture and we talk like we know. We know this, we know that, we know the other. This is what may happen. Ask the question, accountability and transparency, please. Try. Come again. Madam President, the facts are Belize Sugar Industry Limited and the Belize Cogeneration Company Limited have lost in excess of $50 million in the last 5 years. And I ask you to believe me, I'm telling you the facts. Madam President, the facts are that BSI and Belcogen have lost money in 7 consecutive years, and this year will be the 8th consecutive year. That is the context in which we find ourselves, Senator Farber. And just like in 2012, when there was, what were you then? Minister of Education? Minister of Education? You supported it then, though? You supported it then. You were, don't worry about it. The point of the matter is, Madam President, is that the factory is facing a serious financial crisis. The purpose behind this legislation is to extend incentives that were granted from 2012 when there was a crisis. The crisis has not been alleviated. Madam President, we can laugh and we can make a joke. But when you speak to the Cane Farmers Association and when you speak to BSI, let me tell you the crisis, and it's in the budget that they face. Because of the Fusarium virus and the decrease in production of cane, there was a real risk, hopefully avoided, that the factory would have to shut down simply because there was insufficient cane to go through the factory. Nobody's fault, a virus. That reduction in production of sugar cane means a reduction in the production of sugar. A reduction in the production of sugar means less money for farmers, less money for workers, and therefore the economy feels as a result of that. Let us face the fact the sugar industry is in crisis. Senator Herrera attempted and failed, regrettably, to educate he failed. He tried to educate the people opposite. He failed. He failed. He failed. He tried to explain to you in eloquent, articulate, and simple terms that the policy underlying this bill is the same as in the Designated Processing Act bill. And therefore, had BSI been a DPA, it would have gotten these benefits, so there's nothing unusual, strange, or new. I don't get it from here. You listen to Senator, oh, you hear, but you can't understand. I understand. Yeah. It's a lack of understanding. Madam President, let's continue with some of the facts. We have an energy deficit in this country. The bagasse is used, as you know, for cogeneration. We are talking about a company that has lost money from inception, Belcogen. From inception. Why does it remain open? Because primarily, the bagasse is used to fuel the factory. Anything above that is used for the national grid. By using the bagasse to fuel the factory, the cost of production is reduced. And who benefits? The farmers benefit under the net strip value formula. Expenses are taken out, and then it's the profit, 65, 35, 65 to farmer, 35 to the factory. It goes further, Madam President. The current production, the agreement under which electricity is provided by Belcogen, does not have any provision for an increase in the cost of power to the grid. There is no inflationary provision in it. The point I make, Madam President, is that Belcogen needs the assistance, the tax incentives, in order to continue to operate. And there is no additional cost to the Belizean consumer of electricity as a result of it continuing to operate at a time when we need more, not less, energy in this country. Madam President, before I turn specifically to the farmers, Senator Dennison, with greatest of respect, brought up a red herring: fair trade. And it's a red herring. This bill has nothing at all to do with fair trade. It never had anything to do with fair trade. And apparently, what Senator Dennison does not know is that neither BSI nor Belcogen pays fair trade to the farmers. None of those companies pay fair trade to the farmers. So this bill has absolutely nothing to do with whether fair trade is paid, the premium is paid to farmers. Absolutely nothing. It's a complete red herring. No, I don't say you. I say him, Senator Dennison. He brought up fair trade and say over and over. We're getting to that. We're getting to that. I am saying none of these companies pay fair trade to the farmers. So it is a red herring to bring up fair trade when we are talking about BSI and Belcogen. And that is a fact. Senator Latina, make I go back to my WhatsApp. I want one of anything that you use. The point of the matter is this. Let us understand and appreciate that we're dealing with the single biggest employer in the north of this country. We're dealing with the sector, the industry, that is the single biggest economic engine in the north of this country. And both the factory and the field, the farmers are facing crises of different types. The government, under Plan Belize 2.0, has provided $4 million in fuel subsidy to the farmers, $500,000 in license waiver annually, $1.5 million in Sugar Road maintenance annually, 3 years for the Fusarium virus for 2026, $4 million for integrated pest management, and $8 million coming and being processed through the World Bank to deal with the Fusarium. In the budget, there is $1.2 million for the Sugar Industry Control Board. And in the present budget, $0.7 to $1 million in budget support. The association, BSCFA, that Senator Dennison championed, in 2003 and 2023, 2024, got $1 million per year in fertilizer. There is an ongoing grant from the Green Climate Fund of $50 million Belize being administered through the 5 Cs for the factories. I am saying to you that when you talk about not helping the farmers, it is not the fact, Senator Dennison. And we all accept that more should be done. But do not come to the Senate and pretend that the farmers are not being assisted. Again, I don't want to refer to you as a sugar daddy. Did you add up? Did you add up? I don't know. When you granted the bill, did you add it up? Did you add it up? Did you add it up? I don't think so. The long and short of it, Madam President, colleague senators, we are facing an industry in crisis. This legislation is not new. This legislation is no different from the DPA benefits. Therefore, the policy underlying the incentives are the same, and it is necessary in order for us to ensure the viability of Belize Sugar Industries and Belize cogeneration. And as has been said, without the sugarcane farmers, there can be no factory. Without the factory, there can be no sugarcane farmers. It's a symbiotic relationship, and the government of Belize will continue to assist as best it could both the farmers and the millers. Thank you, Madam President, and I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Sugar Industry and Cogeneration Project Act, Chapter 5901 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to extend exemptions from taxes and duties for the continued development of the cogeneration energy project, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye.
Madam President, may we have a division, please?
Can you just wait until I close the vote? Then we move to the division. Meaning I have to wait until the response to the question, and then I call for the division, according to the standing orders. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it. There has been a request for a division of vote. Clerk, can you kindly call for the division?
A division has been called for the Sugar Industry and Cogeneration Project Amendment Bill 2025. Senator Emon Courtney. Aye. Senator Linsford Castillo. Aye. Senator Brittany Calves. Senator Christopher Koyi. Senator Rosel Arana. Senator Hector Guerra. Senator Patrick Faber. Senator Sheena Pitts. Negative. Senator Gabriel Cetina. Senator Kevin Herrera. Senator Reverend Louis Wade Jr. Senator Glenfield Dennison. Senator Dr. El McKay.
Honorable members, as a reminder of what is called for by the standing orders, collection of votes, standing order 46-2. The result shall be declared by the president of or chair, stating, I think the ayes have it, or I think the noes have it, as the case may be, but any senator may challenge the opinion of the chair by claiming a division. Senator Patrick Faber has challenged that position of the ayes. Standing Order 47, if a division that the clerk shall call, in a division, the clerk shall call each senator's name separately, and such senator shall indicate how he desires to vote. The clerk shall thereupon record the vote accordingly. Based on the record of the clerk, 8 senators have voted yes to the bill. 4 senators have voted no to the bill, and there is 1 senator who is absent, so the ayes have it. I will now suspend the Senate for the clerk will now read the bill, and thereafter we will suspend for 5 minutes.
Bill for an Act to amend the Sugar Industry and Cogeneration Project Act, Chapter 5901 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020.
The Senate is suspended for 5 minutes.
Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 10.8, I move that the proceedings on the order paper be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour, though opposed.
Honourable members, the question is that the proceedings on the order paper may be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour, though opposed. All those in favour kindly say aye.
Aye.
Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it. I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to appropriate certain sums of money for the use of the public service of police for the financial year ending 31st March 2027. Madam President, as is customary, I rise to support the bill and the budget presented by the Honourable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in the House of Representatives. Madam President, this annual exercise that we undertake is of constitutional importance, and it is in fact a constitutional mandate and requirement that Parliament oversees the money that it has appropriated for the use by the executive for the affairs of the country. Every year, estimates of revenue and expenditure are presented. Following year, we bring back a report of the outturn of both the expenses and the revenue for the scrutiny of Parliament. It is an exercise of constitutional importance that requires mature deliberation in the Senate. Madam President and colleagues, as we all know, as a small, open economy, Belize is affected by the world economic changes and trade dynamics. Today we witness a rules-based order that is in decline. It has prevailed for years, but in the word of one Prime Minister, it is ruptured. And as a result of that, instability and uncertainty abound. We are witnessing, Madam President, a significant increase in protectionism. Protectionist measures, tariff disputes, and a ruptured international trading system, which presents serious headwinds for the world and specifically for Belize. I say that, Madam President, because we have to be realistic and to know that the estimates of revenue and expenditure that are currently contained in the budget book will, no doubt, be questioned. Those projections will have to account for the effects of the war in Iran. In a year under review, Madam President, notwithstanding the challenges that abound, the Belizean economy grew by 1.9%. Unemployment remains low, and the Belize dollar remains strong, backed by very strong foreign exchange reserves held by the central bank. This was on the back of a total government spending of $1.68 billion. And of this $1.68 billion, $275.3 million was spent on education, $146.2 million on healthcare and NHI, $130 million on infrastructure, and $218 million on public and personal security. This, Madam President, reflects a balanced expenditure addressing social needs as well as infrastructural requirements, as well as trying to increase personal and home and property protection from crime. Madam President, even though the budget projects growth, we look to 2026-2027 with confidence, but mindful of the fragile geopolitical conditions which can dramatically impact the performance of the Belizean economy. And so whilst the budget projects 2.3% growth, we say immediately, this can change, and it can change dramatically. Madam President, a central feature, one of the central features of this budget is the public sector wage adjustment agreed by the government and the unions. In the upcoming fiscal year, public officers, teachers, and security personnel will benefit from another 4% of salary increases that is valued at approximately $28.5 million on an annual basis. This, of course, is in addition to the 4.5% that they got in last year, which was approximately $31.5 million. In total, government has pledged to public officers, to teachers, and to security personnel $78.7 million for this fiscal year. And Senator Denison, which I will come to, that significant wage increase, everybody appreciates. It should have been more. The question is, we can only pay what we can. And as I say, it's a significant and central part of the government's budget because we are aware, Madam President, of the cost of living increases that all Belizeans are experiencing. The Statistics Institute of Belize reports that inflation fell to 1.1%. That is down from 3.3% in 2024 and 6.3% in 2022. The wage adjustment, Madam President, the minimum wage increase, the low inflation are certainly all indicators trending in the right direction, but we accept, Madam President, that this is not enough to attenuate the imported increase in the cost of living. Last year's budget approved a total revenue and grants of $1.78 billion. The projected outturn for this fiscal year is $1.65 billion. Against this, Madam President, the approved expenditure was $1.78 billion, and the projected outturn is $1.68 billion. It therefore reflects, Madam President, that we actually received significantly less revenue than was projected, but we spent less. When I say we, I mean the public sector spent less than it had projected in the budget. For the 2026-2027 fiscal year, we are projecting revenue and grants of $1.79 billion, which is an increase of $139 million compared to last year. And on the expenditure side, government proposes $1.9 billion in total spending. 1.296 of that is recurrent, and 606.8 represents capital investments. For this fiscal year, $780 million is allotted to salaries and pensions, representing some 60% of total recurrent public sector expenditure. And an increase, Madam President, of 11.7% compared to last year in terms of dollars, $82 million more. When one steps back, Madam President, and looks at the expenditure as against the projected revenue of the government, it is being projected that we will have a primary surplus of 1.1% and an overall deficit of 1.49%. And when the $140 million in amortization spending is brought to account, the overall deficit will be 3.3% of GDP. Madam President, The government appreciates that its projections for the upcoming fiscal year are robust, and I say again, in the context of world events. We have experienced not only what is taking place in Iran, what is taking place in Gaza, what is taking place in Ukraine, what is taking place in Sudan, the disruption in the rules-based order, the new approach to sanctions, to tariffs, all have impacts. One, on the increase in availability of funds for public sector expenditure. Two, it affects people's confidence in their respective economy and determines whether or not they travel, and we are a tourism-dependent country. But also, Madam President, as we discussed a short while ago in the case of sugar, our commodities are facing an ever-changing market, international market, as we seek to find more and more markets. I say all of that to foreshadow that there is an unusual level of uncertainty and instability in the world today, and this budget must be appreciated in that context. Madam President, the government proposes major expenditure on infrastructure. The main highway arteries of this country, the Philip Golson Highway and the George Price Highway, will receive and continue to receive major infrastructural development. In addition to this, Madam President, 2 bridges in Belize City, as well as the bridge in Santa Familia, will be replaced. I'm sure my friends on this side will speak in more details of some of the infrastructure projects, Madam President, and so I don't wish to detail all of them. What I will focus on at this stage is some of the social investments that are highlighted and proposed in the budget. In the education sector, Madam President, we expect significant expenditure in the Health Start program, and this program, the Health Start program, feeding program, Madam President, is critical for our students. In 2025-2026, 15,850 students across 58 primary schools and 22 secondary schools benefited from the Health Start feeding program. We will continue and increase that investment. Internet access has been expanded to 283 schools, from preschools to tertiary institutions, reaching approximately 78,000 students and more than 4,500 teachers. In education grants in 2025-2026, this administration recognized the need to go further and increase the total investment to some $16 million. Turning to health, Madam President, the government plans to allocate $181.2 million for the Ministry of Health and Wellness. This includes $66.1 million for hospital services, $41.2 million for medicines, and $7.9 million for primary care services. And again, significant investment will be made in the infrastructure of the health sector. The investment in the hospital in Belmopan, the investment in a hospital in San Pedro, the polyclinic in Docron, the pediatric wing in the Northern Regional Hospital soon to be completed, the Dangriga Polyclinic with maternal and child health expansion, and the retrofitting of the Valley of Peace Health Center and Nurses Quarter are all investments in the health sector that will be undertaken and will continue in the upcoming fiscal year. Madam President, one of the articles of faith of Plan Belize and the Briceño administration is the National Health Insurance. It is, of course, historic that we have now finally rolled out NHI to the Cayo district, bringing coverage across the entire country. But, Madam President, the facts speak. NHI clinics deliver an average of 25,000 patient visits per month. That is 300,000 patients visit NHI clinics on an annual basis. And through the NHI program, Madam President, for 2020 to 2025, the Ministry of Health reports that 7,629 patients underwent diabetic exams. 1,092 of them got cataract surgery, and an additional 735 went through retinopathy laser surgery. Madam President, NHI delivered 2,267 adults eyeglasses to improve their eyesight, and 1,953 to school children who needed eyeglasses. The National Health Insurance Program, Madam President, is an unprecedented success for the Belizean people. Do you agree? Let us take a brief look to the two main drivers of the real economy of Belize, Madam President: agriculture and tourism. In 2025 alone, the agricultural sector grew by 5%, expanding in terms of dollar value, Madam President, from $841.7 million in 2024 to $889.7 million in 2025. This $48 million increase occurred notwithstanding, as we discussed a short while ago, the decrease in earnings from the sugar industry. And that was a significant decrease. Sugar industry earnings fell, Madam President, from by $68.6 million. That is from 182 to 113 million between 2024 and 2025. And that is why we say, Madam President, it was right that we passed the legislation a short while ago, because this industry, and both the field and the factory, needs all the help that it can get. Madam President, we are on the cusp, in terms of the sugar industry, of making a dramatic change for CARICOM. It is expected that this year, Belize will be the first CARICOM country to produce refined white sugar. Refined white sugar, Madam President, is an aspiration that CARICOM has had from God McMahon. We have had countries that have, well, our history for most of CARICOM was born on the backs of sugarcane estates, first farmed and planted by slaves. Today, Madam President, all the countries in the Eastern Caribbean have gone out of sugar. Barbados is very minuscule. Jamaica is struggling. It is only Belize and Guyana, and Belize being the leader and champion, that have serious sugar industries. The ability of Santander to produce refined white sugar will fill an import gap that we have. In excess of 200,000 tons of refined white sugar is brought into CARICOM on an annual basis. And it is the intention of Belize and Guyana to produce within CARICOM refined white sugar. Bananas, Madam President, in 2025, our production and exports went up reaching $91 million, up from $82.4 million in 2024. And Belize expanded our investment and our activity in the cattle industry. We exported 7,748 head of cattle to Mexico. And due to that, Madam President, we had an increase in value from 12 million in 2024 to 16.3 million in 2025. In addition, 33,910 heads were exported informally to our neighbors, increasing earnings by an additional 60.7 million. That brings a total in 2025, Madam President, of 77 million in earning from the cattle industry, and it is projected in 2026 that the earning will be approximately 90 million. That is because it is expected that at least 10,000 head of cattle will be exported to Mexico and an additional 37,000 head of cattle to Guatemala. Madam President, I emphasize this sector because it is a growing sector. In March 2026, we look at the number of persons in cattle, 8,159, up from 7,500 in 2024. Over 5,000 of these are small farmers with less than 50 head of cattle, and over 800 are women. The Belize cattle population continues to grow. We have a record high of 208,455 head of cattle in the middle of March 2025. And so, Madam President, it is our assessment that the agriculture sector, which is the backbone of our Belizean economy, which provides food security and foreign exchange earning and significant employment across the breadth of the country, will continue to grow. It is expected to continue to contribute to job creation, foreign exchange earning, Madam President, and most of all, to keep the Belizean people fed. I turn very briefly to tourism. Tourism, Madam President, produces 45% of GDP, approximately $3.5 billion. It is critical, Madam President, that we appreciate not only the contribution of the tourism sector, but also the challenges that it faces. Climate change, for example, has an effect on our beautiful, majestic barrier reef. Sargassum is a significant challenge that will impact in the long term if we don't find a solution, our tourism industry. But at the same time, Madam President, tourism continues to be the single biggest contributor in terms of employment and in terms of foreign exchange earning. Approximately 35,000 Belizean men and women earn a living in the tourism industry. 2,600 tour guides, 550 tour operators, 1,200 hotel and tourist accommodations, and over 12,000 rooms, all show the increase in investment in the tourism sector. But it is a sector that is made up mostly of small operators, small investors who power the tourism industry every single day. Arrivals in 2025 show that we maintain a strong visitor performance. 552,000 in overnight arrivals and 970,000 in cruise passengers. Investment continues significantly. For example, Fort George, Golden Bay, the villas at Key Corker, and the Four Seasons on Key Chapel. The Ministry of Tourism, Madam President, continues to invest in strategic areas across the country. To name a few, the Punta Gorda Welcome Center, the Bullet Tree Falls Community Center, the North Front Street Fish Market, the Gales Point Manatee Marine Rescue and Educational Center, the Dankriga Multipurpose Park, the Fort George Lighthouse and Seawall Project, and there is going to be, as approved by Cabinet, significant infrastructure work in San Pedro and Key Corker. Madam President, standing back, the government projects that the real economy of Belize will grow. Agriculture will continue to grow from strength to strength, and through the work of the Ministry of Tourism and the Belize Tourism Board, we will have increase in arrivals, increase in overnight stays, increase in cruise passengers, and therefore we look to the future positively but cautiously. Madam President, we debate this budget, and I keep emphasizing it, in unprecedented times. The Prime Minister of Canada at Davos said, and I quote, "Today I talk about the rupture in the world order, the end of a pleasant fiction and the beginning of a harsh reality, where geopolitics, where the large main power, geopolitics, is submitted to no limits and to no constraints." End of quote. The President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, observed, and I quote, "Today I see many states, both big and small, pursuing transactional or multi-vectorial foreign policies. In essence, their aim is to diversify their relations with multiple actors rather than aligning with any one particular bloc. Now, this can be opportunistic, but it may also be justified and reasonable. This depends on political choices. A transactional or multi-vectorial foreign policy is dominated by interests that drive practical choices of states, and this is entirely legitimate. This kind of foreign policy is based on a realistic understanding of power. Power defines the limits of what is possible for each state.